Hello there, welcome here where we learn how to bend our wrists. And it's an everyday practice that you should definitely consider because it has so many various benefits, such as lifting pants. I am back. I've been away for a month and some days because I've been away on holiday, and also I moved to this flat, which is actually the same flat but it's just upstairs. That's why there's some stairs. The trip back from these holidays was very long. It was 25 hours long. And the thing is, the day that I arrived, I watched this movie after 25 hours of travel. It was intense. The thing is, as I was watching this movie, I started thinking, is this just another sob story? Don't get me wrong, I love this movie so much. Everyone should go and watch it. Literally, like, the cinematography is excellent. The storytelling, the writing, the script is amazing. I like the way that they approach the scenes is very original and different from what I'm used to seeing. But yeah, I caught myself thinking this, and I think it's not just me, it's also the fact that I've been reading online a lot of comments from people saying, I'm not sure if I want to keep watching this sad stuff about queer people. Like, I'm a bit done with it. I want to see some positive stuff. I want to see it more normalized. So then I did some research, and just to give you some context on this, there's like many different types of representation, right? But there's these two specific ones, which is the sob story, and then the idealistic representation type. I don't know if they're the opposite, but they sound like they are the opposite, and they have opposite effects on different types of people. I mean, I think like both of these are pretty much self-explanatory, but the sob story, it gives you a very realistic idea of what the struggles of the queer people were and are nowadays. And this is really good for cishet people because we're giving them an awareness of how queer people struggle in the past and are struggling, and why we want to change that and why we don't want to go back there. But then it happens that because it's so realistic, sometimes it can be super triggering to queer people who have gone through these things or who are going through these things and don't want to be reminded of that reality. And to this, I can contribute by saying we should probably have some like screen in the beginning of the movie saying this could be triggering to some queer people. I mean, it's probably much more complex than that, but that's just one thought, I guess. And then there's this other type of representation, which is the idealistic representation, where it sort of portrays this fake world where everything is perfect and there's no discrimination against queer people, no matter if you're trans, gay, lesbian, non-binary, whatever. It's just like any other person. And it's not even brought up in the movie. And like, as I'm talking about this, I'm like, why is it so hard to do in reality? Literally, you just have to mind your own business. But anyway, what this type of representation does is show cishet people that queer people are just like any other human being, which is great. But it doesn't show the negative part of being a queer person and the struggles and the discrimination that people actually suffer, which is not great. But for queer people, this type of content is very wholesome because they can sort of see themselves on screen in a very normalized light without any problematic lights on. And then there's me, who also watches these movies and then I get super excited about that reality in the movie, but then when I go back home to my reality, I get super depressed because I sort of compare those two and it's like, ugh. But that's just a different story, I guess. But now that I've talked about that, let's get into All of Us Strangers. So the reason why this movie can be considered a sob story, I think it's because one of the main topics is Adam's life and how he is 40 something years old, and now he's processing something that didn't happen when he was young because his parents passed away when he was 12. So he didn't have the opportunity to come out to them, and somehow he hasn't really grieved them properly. So now he's experiencing all this stuff that didn't happen back then because he didn't properly process it. And then in order to do so, he goes to their house and somehow has conversations with them, and they look exactly like they look like when he was 12 and he looks 40 something years old. And these conversations, I think that are the best part of the movie personally, because I relate to them so much. Without giving too much away, when I was a teenager, my dad would make me do all these sports. Even though if I didn't want to, he would just take me to different sports constantly. I hated each and every one of those sports. And every now and then, I just get super angry about that. And I'm like, why couldn't you just listen to me? Why were you doing that? But then I was watching some videos that he recorded of us, me and my sister, when we were kids. And I could see how much he cared for us. And I was like, why am I such a prick? Why do I care so much about just one little part of everything that he did for us? So this came out wrong. What I meant to say is that my dad was taking me to these sports because it was a stereotypical straight guy thing to do, and he would never ask me if I wanted or not. And I just happened to be a stereotypical gay guy who didn't like sports. But that doesn't mean that if you're a gay guy, you don't like sports. Of course, there's gay guys who like sports. And in this scene, that's exactly what happens. Adam's like, he's telling his dad, you know, I still remember.
You told me not to cross my legs like a woman over and over and over again.
He gets super angry about that, and the father feels guilty about it. But then he says repeatedly,
Dad, I get it. It was so long. It was so long ago.
And he cries and he's like, why can't I just get over this? It's just so silly to stick to these feelings. And then he says, but there were nice times too. You know, you were a good father as well. And this just makes me feel seen, but it also gives me like a relief and a permission to, yes, these two feelings and thoughts can be there. And it's okay to feel them. And I think what a lot of us old-ish queer people can relate to it, because when we were growing up, there wasn't a lot of visibility and parents didn't know how to deal with having a queer child. But it's also not great, and it doesn't feel great to feel so misunderstood. And then the scene when he comes out to his mom, I remember at the movies, people were laughing because of her very old school reactions.
I'm gay.
As in homosexual.
Asking like, but are people okay with this nowadays?
Aren't people nasty to you?
No, things are different now.
But then it gets super dark, because that's what actually his mom was thinking back then, and that's why he cannot get over it.
They say it's a very lonely kind of life.
They don't actually say that anymore.
That's probably one of the reasons why he hasn't been able to process all these stuff for this long, because it's hard not to feel accepted when you had parents growing up in the 80s. So as per the title of the video, I don't think it's just another sob story. I do think it's a sob story, which there's nothing wrong about that. It can be a good type of representation, and it can do good things for society, as I mentioned before. But it's not just another one, because it's about someone who is now struggling for something that happened in the 80s. I don't think we've had that perspective in another movie, and this can be so cathartic for so many men who are now in their 40s and that probably experienced similar things, or that actually had their parents passing away when they were young, or they just didn't come out to them and they had to live their lives the same way, just trying to process that. And this is exactly why it's a good type of representation. But anyway, that was the video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope I made sense. Let me know in the comments what you thought, if you related to it, if you thought that it was very dark and you found it a bit triggering. I personally did a little, mostly towards the end, when it's not supposed to be. It's supposed to be hopeful, I think, but I found it very dark at times. But I loved it anyway, and I would recommend you watch it. So yeah, please give it a like and subscribe as always, and I'll see you next time.